There are really two verses that have formed the shape of today's message. From the passage in Ecclesiastes that Alan read, there is a word of committing to plant, to sow seed, even when the wind blows. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap, in Ecclesiastes 11:4. And then from Isaiah, there comes a further word of not being content with simply preparing the ground. Isaiah 28:24 says this: when a farmer plows for planting, does he plow continually? Does he keep on breaking up and working the soil? When he has leveled the surface, does he not sow caraway and scatter cumin? Both of these call to an act of committing to sow seeds, to the act of planting, even though the ground may not be perfect and the weather may not be clear. There comes a time when you have to go and get seeds in the ground. 3 years ago, we shaped these 3 words of plant, grow, flourish as a way of speaking about how we are as church, something of our calling here in Cathcart. And over the next few weeks, we'll explore these words again, biblically, about how they function and challenge us. This language of plant, grow, flourish is also part of the background to a word that came to me a few months before lockdown started, and I'll turn to that shortly. But I'm so grateful to both Alan and Kim for sharing their act of planting in their life and experiences. They have given ways to take up the challenge of the act of sowing seeds of God's kingdom, of planting that is present in these verses in Ecclesiastes and Isaiah. Alan spoke of the awareness, after many years of planting and sowing seed for the kingdom, that in all of it, we follow after a missionary God. God is going before, he prepares the ground. He's already stirring the hearts of others with the same desires as the dreams and hopes that he's placing on our hearts. And I pray that we would have clarity about the calling of God in our hearts and find the excitement and the joy of that and the willingness to share it. Is there something forming in you that you sense is God nudging you towards something, but the wind is blowing and the ground is not perfect? Alan is suggesting that those are the moments you begin to sow the seed and find that the ground is already prepared by God. Or to shift the metaphor a little, the path is already walked by the Lord. Footsteps are already there. We follow where he is already walking. And I loved Alan's words of missional imagination, that each sowing of seed, each planting is different, that we follow an infinitely creative God, and that how we may be called to sow the seeds of the kingdom may well be different from those around us and from what has gone before. Maybe part of the sowing of the seed of God's kingdom is to let God's vision in all its creative glory take hold of us and shape a new planting. Reminds me of the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, where the Lord is going on a journey and he's got these 3 servants and they have bags of gold, 5 bags, 2 bags, and 1 bag according to ability. And the first servant gets creative. When the Lord returns, he's doubled what he had, 10 bags. The second servant similarly gets to work with what he has been given, turns the 2 bags into 4 bags. But the third servant, he just buried what was given and then handed it back. Nothing was done with it. And there is a call upon us to take what the Lord has given and let it grow. Plant it and let it grow. And I think that opens to Kim's life lessons in planting, the sense of risk-taking, which the passage is in Ecclesiastes, and as I point to in the act of planting. It is a risk to go out and plant seeds, to sow seeds. We don't have a great record, Ellen and I, at planting things and seeing them grow fully to full life. Our record is not great, but we still go out and plant things and hope and expectation that that's going to happen, going to survive. But there is a sense in which this is risk-taking to go out and plant. And the planting of things, it takes time. And there are these different outcomes. Under the surface, something wonderful can be happening. Or sometimes the crops fail and we don't get the result, but resilience is built. And that took me to the parable of the sower in Matthew 13, and to pick up on an emphasis in Jesus' words that maybe I didn't see before, the generosity of the one who is sowing. This man is taking the seed, and out he goes, and he's throwing the seed out over good soil, over weeds and thistles, over rocky ground. He just goes along, and the seed gets thrown out all over the place. There's the utter generosity of it, while taking the risk of not knowing where it is going to grow, but being willing to throw the seed out, to plant, even when the wind is blowing and the ground is not perfect, he will plant. And there is an enormous generosity here that I hadn't quite seen before, but I love the challenge of this act of generosity. And that maybe brings us to Alan's final word in this again. Why plant and why sow? And here is the right reason. Do you love the people that God is calling you to? Are you willing to go into fresh fields and unknown ground to sow the seed for them? What is God saying to your heart about what he has given you and how he is leading you? And here I turn to this word that was given to me back in November 2019. I shared this with the deacons at a retreat in early 2020, just a few weeks before the lockdown, and it was planned to be shared with the church, but other events took over. But I returned to it now. I think this is a time to share this. This came through a time where I was apart in Pitlochry with a small group of other ministers, part of a cycle of prayer and reflection around our ministries. And I'm not saying this is a word of the Lord, but I share it in the context of planting and growing and flourishing as a picture that I now carry of where we are as a church and where I am myself in ministry. And let me start first with a picture that took me into ministry in Motherwell. In 1997, those far off happy days, 1997, I carried out a student ministry in Motherwell Baptist Church between third and fourth year of the degree, and then I was offered the chance to take up the ministry of the church when I finished. And within that period, I took time to reflect and to pray and to sense God's leading. And I took time walking around the streets of the old college in Pollock Shields in the autumn. And the picture word that I came away with at the time was this: the autumn leaves are falling. And it was this: let what needs to fall, fall, so that new life can come. And I accepted the call to Motherwell under this word. And while I've not always carried that into explicit practice, it has marked the nature of the ministry that I hold in my head. I think in some ways I'm a gentle iconoclast. I don't hold too dearly too much. If it gets in the way of new life, I'll let it go. I've sought to prepare ground for new life, strip away what needs to be stripped away so that new life can come. And I can position my ministry in Motherwell across 13 years as preparing the ground for the next stage. And I knew at one point in early 2011 that preparation had come to an end, and that I wasn't the one to go forward to that next stage of church. And at that point, you as a church came and approached me, and I can trust God's timing in all this, that I came here and let Motherwell grow in a different way. But the new picture that settled in this time in Pitlochry in late 2019 now feels important for me in the same way that image of 1997 held me for 13 years. It's a guiding picture, guiding words, and it's beginning to shape how I see ministry and how I see us as a church. And across conversation and reflection and prayer and sharing, I settled in this in Pitlochry. And this is a new word to do with blossoming. I used this picture in various ways at different times. And in all the conversations that were going on, the reflection and the prayer, this has become a personal image and an image for the church. After all that has fallen that needs to fall, after the leaves have gone and the winter has passed, blossom comes. After we've seen the leaves fall, there is a gift of blossoming and new life in the spring. And in the words of a good Scottish poet, I'm concerned about the blossom. For myself, part of this lies with pursuing what allows each one of us to blossom in Christ's fruitfulness. What matters for us as a church is not just to sit with preparing the grounds, to hear the call of Isaiah and Ecclesiastes, to take the next step to plant and let the blossoming come. We are to be concerned about the blossoming of the church, not just stripping back what restrains us, what is no longer of use in the kingdom, but what does it look like when we blossom? What does it look like when Catholic Baptist Church blossoms? After the leaves have fallen, after the winter is done, when the new seed is being planted, what does that look like? What does the blossoming of the church look like? And after 22 years of that first picture, this is the next picture that I have at a personal level for the act of ministry. And I felt this was important to share with you. That the core image I have in my head for now is how we as a church come to blossom. What are the callings of your hearts? How is God's imagination and creativity calling you out to sow the seed, to plant, to prepare for blossoming? And there are many times when the wind blows. This last year and a half has been full of high winds blowing and the ground being hard. But there is a time to start with the generosity of the sower, to start putting the seed out, to plant, to grow, to flourish towards the blossom. And that begins when we take what we have and generously cast it out, despite the wind blowing and the difficult grounds. But if the calling in our hearts is that of God, then he has already prepared other hearts to take risks, to take up his gloriously creative vision, to live to his generosity, to follow his paths, so that maybe under the surface of each of our lives, God is shaping something wonderful. That is my prayer for just now. That is my picture for just now. And I pray that if God is troubling your hearts or nudging your hearts, that you speak to me or to anybody around you, and we see what God is leading us in all of that. This is a time for planting towards the blossoming of the church.